Economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, in the Algerian-French relations, Algeria responded to the French president's letter with clarifications on visas, bilateral agreements, and the principle of reciprocity. Algeria reaffirmed its commitment to the total elimination of weapons of mass destruction before the UN. UN experts have called for the dismantling of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, condemning the exploitation of humanitarian aid for military geopolitical purposes in a serious violation of international law. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Salmani. The Algerian authorities have examined carefully the letter sent by the French president to his prime minister, as well as the explanations provided on the 7th of August to the chargé d'affaires of the Algerian embassy in France by the Quai d'Orsay. A statement issued today by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the Algerian authorities have carefully examined the letter sent by the French president to his prime minister, as well as the explanations provided on the 7th of August to the chargé d'affaires of the Algerian embassy of Algeria in France by the Quai d'Orsay, adding that the examination of the letter and the accompanying explanations warrants some important preliminary observations. Sarah Allal tells us more in this report.
First and foremost, with regard to the deterioration of Algerian-French relations, the communiqué indicated that this letter exonerates France from all responsibility and places all the blame on the Algerian side. Nothing could be further from the truth and reality. At every stage, the current crisis has irregularly given rise to official communiques from the Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These communiques have systematically established responsibility for the escalation and revealed that the reactions and countermeasures adopted by the Algerian authorities were strictly and rigorously in line with the principle of reciprocity. Secondly, the letter seeks to portray France as a country that is highly concerned with respecting its bilateral and international obligations, and Algeria as a state that is in constant violation of its own. Here, too, nothing could be further from the truth and reality. In this case, it is France that has contravened its own domestic legislation. It is also France that has failed to respect its commitment under the 1968 Algerian-French Agreement on the movement, employment and residence in France of Algerian nationals and their families, the 1974 Algerian-French Consular Convention, and the 2013 Algerian-French Agreement on visa exemptions for holders of diplomatic and service passports. Furthermore, it is France that has made it its sole and exclusive objective to enforce the 1994 Algerian-French Agreement on the readmission of Algerian nationals living illegally in France, an agreement whose reason to be has distorted and whose true objectives has misappropriated. Finally, it is France that has freed itself from its obligations under the 1950 European Convention on Human Rights. The statement added that all of these French violations have had the sole purpose of disregarding the acquired rights of Algerian nationals who are from the French territory, often arbitrarily and abusively, and to deprive them of the administrative and judicial remedies guaranteed to them by the French law itself, and to render meaningless the Algerian state's duty of consular protection towards its national in all places and at all times. Thirdly, as soon as this crisis of its own making arose, France approached its management in terms of power relations. It was France that proceeded with injunctions and ultimatums. This was to ignore rather lightly that Algeria does not yield to pressure, threats and blackmail of any kind. Algeria would like to reiterate once again that it has never historically requested the conclusion of a bilateral visa exemption agreement for holders of diplomatic and service passports. On numerous occasions, it is France and France alone that has been the source of such a request. By deciding to suspend this agreement, France is offering Algeria the ideal opportunity to announce for its part the outright denunciation of this same agreement. In accordance with the provisions of Article 8 of the said agreement, the Algerian government will immediately notify the French government of this denunciation through diplomatic channels. From now on, visas granted to French holders of diplomatic and service passports will be subject to the same conditions as those imposed by the French side on their Algerian counterparts. In relation to the announcement of the reactivation of the visa readmission levy, the Algerian government wishes to note that this levy is in flagrant violation of the 1968 Algerian-French Agreement and the 1950 European Convention on Human Rights. The letter from the French head of state to his prime minister presents a biased view of the issue of diplomatic and consular staff accreditation in both countries. For more than 2 years, it has been France that has taken the initiative not to grant the accreditations in question to Algerian consular staff. Algeria has merely applied the principle of reciprocity. Once the French obstacles are removed, Algeria will respond with similar measures. This position has already been notified to the French authorities and remains in force. In its final provisions, the letter from the French head of state to his prime minister lists a number of bilateral disputes that need to be resolved. Algeria also intends to raise through diplomatic channels other disputes with France that must be resolved in the same way, the statement concluded.
Now, representing the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Minister of War Veterans or Mujahideen, Laid al-Bigha, has taken part in the celebrations of the independence of Bolivia, marking 200 years. The Bolivian President, Luis Arce, presided over the celebration ceremony, which took place in the city of Sucre, in the presence of representatives of several countries. On this occasion, Laid al-Bigha met the Bolivian president, to whom he conveyed the fraternal greetings of the President Abdelmajid Tebboune, as well as his wishes on the occasion of the celebration of independence. This meeting was an opportunity to recall the historical values shared by the two friendly peoples, which constitute the foundation for the development and strengthening of relationships between the two countries. Now, the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the national community abroad, Sofian Shaib, from the city of Awa, Turkmenistan, has stressed the importance of developing South-South cooperation as an essential element in achieving efforts and initiatives aimed at addressing the challenges facing developing countries. More with Mas'ud Sharfi.
On the sidelines of the Third United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, Mr. Shaib participated in the ministerial meeting entitled Leveraging South-South Cooperation to Promote Trade Facilitation and Deepen Regional Integration for Increased Participation of Landlocked Developing Countries in the International Trade. In his speech, the Secretary of State highlighted the importance of developing South-South cooperation as an essential element in achieving efforts and initiatives aimed at addressing the challenges faced by developing countries by using their own resources.
My country has contributed to major structural projects on our continent, believing in the benefits of such cooperation. These projects include the Trans-Saharan Highway, the Trans-Saharan Gas Pipeline, and the Trans-Saharan Fiber Optic Link, which will directly contribute to the development of the countries of the region, including landlocked developing countries. In this regard, Algeria renews its commitment to developing cooperation in all areas among the countries of the South to overcome the current situation facing many landlocked developing countries, which is characterized by obstacles that hinder development and for which the current international cooperation system has to find and to implement the effective solutions. The debt burden remains one of them and hinder the progress of these countries. Together we can build a future of shared prosperity that serves the interest of our people.
noted that South-South cooperation will not be enough on its own to remove the various barriers and obstacles that hamper these countries, which require the promotion of bold and practical international cooperation frameworks through which developing countries assume their responsibilities and commitments towards this category in order to contribute to addressing the major challenges related to food security, climate change, and energy.
Still in Awaza, Turkmenistan, where the third UN conference on landlocked developing countries is being held, the first Iranian Vice President, Mohammad Reza Aref, has said in his speech during the opening that the Gaza Strip subjected to a savage Zionist aggression is now the most landlocked region of the world, calling on the international community to act urgently to save Gazans of the inevitable humanitarian disaster and to impose an immediate ceasefire. Now back to Algeria. A memorandum of understanding has been signed in Algiers between the industrial mining group Sonarem, represented by its subsidiary Somifos, and Fatima Fertilizers, a subsidiary of the Pakistani group Fatima, aimed at strengthening bilateral partnership in the fields of mining industries and the production of all types of fertilizers. Mas'ud Shafi again.
The signing ceremony held at the ministry's headquarters was chaired by the Minister of State, Minister of Energy, Mines and Renewable Energies, Mohammed Arqab, in the presence of the CEO of Sonarem Group, Bilqasim Sultani, the CEO of Somifos, Likh al-Mukhtar, and the Executive Director of Operations at Grand Exploration and Mining Company, a subsidiary of the Fatima Group, Mukhtar Abbas, as well as several officials from the ministry and the two groups. The memorandum aims to commercialize and locally process phosphate from Bir al-Atar, boost fertilizer production, explore joint projects, and strengthen Algerian-Pakistani cooperation in mining and industrial development. The CEO of Somifos, Likh al-Mukhtar, stated that the memorandum begins with phosphate marketing, then advances to mineral valorization and new technologies, aiming for full transformation of the value chain.
This memorandum initially covers the marketing of phosphate, then moves on to the valorization of the mineral and the addition of new technologies, ultimately leading to the full transformation of this chain.
Both parties agreed to build a strategic partnership focused on economic integration and mineral resource development to support food security and industrial growth.
You're still listening to the English service of Radio Algeria International. Algeria has affirmed through its Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Toufiq Laïd Koudri, its commitment to the complete elimination of all weapons of mass destruction in the world, whether nuclear, chemical, or biological. Mas'ud Sharfi.
In a speech delivered at the meeting of the 1540 Committee in charge of implementing Resolution 1540 on the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, Toufiq Laïd Koudri reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to non-proliferation, warned of evolving threats from WMDs and AI, and welcomed the strong global response with 185 national reports submitted.
As we gather today, over 20 years after the adoption of the Resolution 1540, Algeria reaffirms its unwavering commitment to this pillar of the global non-proliferation architecture. The threat of weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of non-state actors remains as real today as it was 2 decades ago. This threat has evolved and intensified. Rapid technological advancement, including artificial intelligence, creates new challenges that demand our collective vigilance and action. Algeria commends the committee's sustained efforts in promoting universal implementation of the resolution. We note with satisfaction that 185 member states have now submitted their first national reports, demonstrating strong global commitments to our shared objectives.
Mr. Koudri stressed Algeria's focus on fair access to peaceful technology, avoiding burden on developing countries, boosting regional cooperation, and supporting the committee's updated assistance process.
Algeria stressed the high priority that should be given to the following areas. First, maintaining the delicate balance between legitimate peaceful use of technology and other materials for development and socio-economic progress, and the imperative to prevent their misuse by non-state actors. Second, ensuring that implementation efforts do not create unnecessary burdens or overlapping obligations, especially for developing countries. Third, strengthening cooperation between the committee and regional organizations. We call for enhanced partnerships with relevant mechanisms, including the Pilindaba Treaty Framework and the African Convention on Prevention and Combating Terrorism. Fourth, Algeria appreciates the committee's effort to modernize its assistance mechanism, as reflected in the revised procedures adopted in November 2024.
The Deputy Permanent Representative of Algeria also stressed that in the face of the proliferation of transnational criminal networks and the persistence of the terrorist threat, we must strengthen our collective response, intensify international cooperation, and continue to support the mandate of the committee in charge of implementing Resolution 1540.
The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has said that more than 9,000 children have suffered from acute malnutrition during the month of July in the Gaza Strip because of the blockade imposed by the Zionist entity, pointing out that this is the highest monthly figure ever recorded to date. According to the UN agency, 9,205 children were identified in July as suffering from acute malnutrition after screening 117,000 children aged 6 to 59 months. More details with Said Bouazi.
The previous sad record was set last December and reported 5,436 children suffering from acute malnutrition. The Palestinian enclave is still plagued by a sharp increase in the number of malnutrition rates among children and pregnant women, said OCHA, noting that in Gaza the ravages of hunger have been materializing for several months now through the unbearable images of children with emaciated bodies and eyes sunken in the orbits, broadcast by the hospitals of the enclave or relayed by messages from humanitarian agencies on social networks. Among them, more than 1,700 children suffer from severe acute malnutrition, 40 of whom were hospitalized in stabilization centers. The majority of the identified cases are in the city of Gaza, with 4,280 children, including 725 cases of severe acute malnutrition. Then follows Deir el-Balah with more than 3,400 cases of malnutrition, including 675 with severe acute malnutrition, Khan Yunis with 1,470 cases, including 369 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition, 36 in Rafah and 52 in northern Gaza. The UN agency specifies in this respect that individual data resulting from these tests remain limited to northern Gaza and Rafah due to access constraints and a reduced operational presence. Based on data from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, OCHA says that hospitals in the territory have recorded 5 new deaths due to starvation and malnutrition in the past 24 hours, bringing the total number of direct victims of hunger to at least 193, including 96 children.
Now, UN experts have called for the dismantling of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, condemning the exploitation of humanitarian aid for military and geopolitical purposes in a serious violation of international law. They pleaded for, or in a joint statement, that the credibility and effectiveness of humanitarian aid must be restored by dismantling the foundation and allowing the experienced humanitarian actors from the United Nations and civil society to take back the reins of management and distribution of vital aid. For these experts, this foundation is an extremely worrying example of how humanitarian aid can be instrumentalized for secret military and geopolitical purposes in serious violation of international law. Now, the non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch has said that the Zionist entity has bombed more than 500 schools sheltering displaced people in the Gaza Strip since the launch of its genocidal aggression on the 7th of October 2023 against the Palestinian enclave. The details in this report by Said Bouazi.
In a statement, Human Rights Watch stressed that the bombing by the Zionist occupation army of schools turned into shelters is part of a military offensive which destroys most of the remaining civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, displaces again hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and aggravates an already catastrophic humanitarian situation in the besieged Palestinian territory. The human rights NGO also indicated that the Zionist strikes on the schools highlight the lack of safe places for displaced people who represent the vast majority of the population of the Palestinian enclave. It added that these attacks have deprived civilians of safe havens and have seriously disrupted the educational system for many years, emphasizing that the reconstruction and rehabilitation of schools will require significant resources and a lot of time. The organization also called for a ban on arms deliveries to the Zionist entity, as well as to take urgent measures to implement the United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Repression of the Crime of Genocide. The toll of the genocidal Zionist aggression launched by the Zionist occupation forces against the population of the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023, reached as of Wednesday 61,158 martyrs and 151,442 injured, according to the Palestinian health authorities.
Ghana's defense and environment ministers have died in a helicopter crash in the south of the country. The presidency announced hours after the army reported that a helicopter carrying 5 passengers and 3 crew members had gone missing. Edward Oman Bouama, appointed defense minister earlier this year after President John Mahama's inauguration in January, and Ibrahim Mortala Mohamed, Minister of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, were among the victims. All those on board were killed, the authorities confirmed. This is Radio Algeria International. Thank you for listening.